All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for your patience as we let everybody join. We were joking backstage that it's a little bit like finding parking these days, trying to get into any new Zoom session. So we appreciate that you're here. We're going to get things kicked off. So first, a couple of housekeeping items, of course, as you are used to. We wanted to share with you a couple of the upcoming events that we have going on. So on behalf of Triangle New York and Iowa, we welcome you. There are some fantastic things coming up in April. So if you are in the Triangle area or just want to attend some of their events, definitely check out their email marketing workshop. They're going to talk all things ROI, measurement, engagement. Should be fantastic. At Iowa, there is another workshop going around no money, no problem. So if you're marketing in the COVID area, go check out that. Again, you don't have to be local if you don't want to be. And then the next one is in New York. They are navigating power and organizational politics as part of their Young Women series. So fantastic programming coming up in the month of April. So if you're in these chapters, go check it out if you would like to. Otherwise, we are going to recognize some of our fantastic partners in both of our chapters. None of this can happen without these incredible people and these companies in our lives helping make this better. So this is our community. If you have a chance to work with any of these people, please check them out and afford them the opportunity to do that. With that, there are going to be some opportunities to throw questions into the chat. We will make time for them if we can. So feel free to throw those into live chat. You have some set questions that we're going to ask, but if we have time at the end, we'll get into them. Otherwise, we can hopefully tackle some of your questions in the small breakout rooms that'll happen in the second half of this event. So thank you again for joining us for the data and analytics of Fireside with some of the names that you think of when you think of data and analytics, which is Google, Cisco, and Salesforce. I have the distinct pleasure of moderating this discussion with some incredible, super smart speakers. We have Sven Alsland, who is a marketing and analytics executive at Cisco. He's the resident mastermind behind Cisco's decision grade insights, their impact, and that impact to their market, their customer experience, and their funnel. We have Nandini Antharaman, and she is the head of the measurement at Google, and she's responsible for advancing their suite of measurement solutions for their brand advertisers. And she also champions the women in measurement in analytics within Google. And then we have Peter Coffey, and he is the VP of Strategic Research at Salesforce. And he's a leading resource in the area of customer engagement, new data models, and business applications of AI technologies. So huge thanks for them joining us. We are going to go ahead and get rolling now. If you go to the next slide. We're going to throw their faces up here with their title. So if you have questions specifically for one of them, throw them into the chat, address it to them, and we'll take it if we can at the end. But with that, we're going to get started with one of the basic questions, which is, where is that best place to start with data, analytics, and insights? And I want you each to answer this. And I'm getting it over to Nandini first, and then Sven, and then Peter. So Nandini, where is the best place in your mind to start with data, analytics, and insights?
Yeah, so hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all, virtually, albeit. I'm going to state something rather obvious, but as I work with my team of analysts and thought about this question, it's a rather common misstep. The best place to start, obviously, is with your hypothesis or your question. And hopefully that one is mired in a customer-centric problem you're trying to resolve over here. So from the point of identifying that question or hypothesis, I liken the journey of data to insights as like one of observing a painting, if you will. You stare really closely at it, you see a lot of dots, right, at the painting. That's your data, it's scattered. And in today's day and age, the most distinguishing feature about data is the one you as companies and advertisers own and know about your consumers. So I'd invest a lot in any tools and solutions that help you collect, enhance, and manage that data. You go from there, if you continue the painting analogy, to be able to discerning shapes, forms, and that's the analytics. So analytical tools, and I'm in advertising, so things like Google Analytics, Adobe Analytics, really help you define the patterns in your data. And then lastly, the human science starts coming into forming and defining meaning through all of this. And that's where marketers and analysts come in. But it goes back really to one, what you're trying to draw, what is the question you're trying to answer, and two, what materials do you have to do this with? So what data do you have in hand? And again, it's a changing time, and the more data you know and own about consumers is going to be more and more relevant and distinguishing for you.
It's a fantastic answer about painting a picture and finding those foundational elements. Sven, for you, where is the best place to start with data analytics and insights?
Oh, thank you first of all for having me. I'm super excited to be here, and I agree with everything that Nandini said. Kind of the angle I want to take is really, though, at Cisco, data analytics and insights is all about making better business decisions. So the first question which we typically ask ourselves is, where do we see the greatest opportunity to have an impact as an analytics organization? And analytics is something that can be applied extremely broadly. And I cannot think of a situation that could not benefit from some data analytics and insights. So I think it is important to prioritize those opportunities to make certain that you focus in the right area. And that will depend on the nature of your business, what your marketing organization is focused on, and so on and so forth. That said, impact, having business impact is not only about good analysis. What is perhaps more important is how you go about inserting that capability into the business in a way that ensures that action is taken and impact is realized. So I think that a search finding a good business partner who will be as invested in the outcome as you, an analytics professional, is absolutely critical. For example, at Cisco, one example of this is that we find a lot of really great impact when we work with, for example, inside sales or maybe our virtual demand center. And that said, though, I would say that, probably we got this situation that perhaps something as much as 80% of the analytics that we end up doing will actually not result in meaningful act, might actually go underutilized. So I would just really reiterate what I said about making certain that you strike up the right partnerships in the business to make certain that you drive it to impact. It will be tempting to rush into areas which seems trendy. Marketing analytics in particular, there are probably 1,000 vendors plus that provides capabilities that makes you smarter. But I think it is easy to confuse kind of that initial surge of excitement with impact. So I really, again, would iterate what I just said, that I think it is important to stop, take a breath, and ask yourself those two questions again. Where could our team greatly benefit from making better business decisions? And two, do I have a business partner that will invest together with me and drive the activation of the analysis and therefore drive action and impact? I think in the end, success comes when you turn data and analytics into being an integral part of the business. And that might actually end up being a multi-year journey as well, involving cultural shifts. And only then do I think you will actually end up having tremendously high business value. So I'll leave it at that.
Those are some wise words right out the gate. So we're going to send it over to Peter now. Peter, where do you feel the best place to start with data analytics and insights is?
Well, if we're going to talk about data in the context of marketing, I don't know if we can ever do better than John Wanamaker's quote that I know half of my advertising spend is wasted, and if I only knew which half, I would have a basis for making improvement. I think if there's one thing that Salesforce has been doing for 22 years, it's been trying to evolve what used to be systems of record into systems of performance improvement and prediction. And the degree to which data from recent surveys, for example, by Splunk, which found that business leaders believe that half of the data they collect is dark data that does nothing to illuminate their path for forward motion. I've talked with many organizations that tell me half of their budget is spent recording information that goes into file cabinets, literal or digital, as the case may be, and it's never useful for anything again after it's been reported. And I think the emphasis on why are you generating numbers? Someone once said the purpose of statistics is insight, not history, and I would argue today, the only reason to be making the investments that companies are making, analytics in predictive capability and machine learning and other advanced technologies, is to guide better decisions. Ultimately, all we really want is a magic 8-ball that doesn't ever say reply hazy, try again, and always gives an accurate statement about should I do this or should I not. Everything else is details. And if you can remind yourself the purpose of collecting this number is to tell me what to do next, I think that can provide a focus, but also an urgency and an understanding that there's a reason why we're doing this. It's not to make the annual report, have prettier graphs. It's to produce superior marketing, superior sales performance, superior profitability, superior customer loyalty.
Fantastic. You all made some really stellar points, and I want to dig in a little more on that. And so this question is actually for Sven. You'd said, where can we have the greatest impact? So my question to you is, where have you found the biggest impact in applying insights from data?
That is a great question. And I think that when I think about at least what my team does, we play across planning, execution, and optimization. So obviously we are tremendously invested in optimizing marketing funnel and those sort of things. And that's something we've been working on for years, and you can always do a great job in those areas. But I didn't want to really talk about that today. I think we have covered that ground a lot. One of the areas which I've been particularly interested in the last maybe 18 months is how can marketing utilize the enormous amounts of digital data being collected to help our sellers be more effective and efficient. And it may not necessarily be an area which marketing typically has been focused on. Oftentimes we focus on brand marketing, maybe we focus on lead generation, demand generation. And what I found is that by exposing insights to the sellers inside their workflow and processes, we actually have even more impact. And I want to give you a couple of examples. And at Cisco, we call this seller insights. And in essence, we have built out a set of models, advanced models, prescriptive and models where we actually prescribe next best actions. So rather than simply talk about insights, we actually talk about what the account manager or the inside sales rep needs to do next. So one example of this, again, which may not be typical role marketing, is we took all the digital data that we have, first party and third party, and built out early warning system for the sellers. So in essence, imagine an account manager with maybe 200 accounts, maybe at any given point in time, 200-300 opportunities active. What we do is we use two different signals. One is declining engagement with Cisco properties. The other one is increasing competitive pressures from third-party data. And if we see those two things, basically first-party and third-party data, pointing to decreased engagement with Cisco and increased engagement with the competition, we will raise an alert to the sellers where they can then take action. And we've actually done A/B testing on this, where we have had a treatment group and a control group. And what we have found is that by simply alerting the sellers to competitive pressures and declines in engagement, we can have an increase in conversion rates from opportunity to book upwards of 100%. So typically what we found is that opportunities that are under this sort of early warning pressure only closes at 15% in the control group, but we managed to get that upwards of 30% by intervening with the opportunity by educating the sellers. So these are the sort of things that I get super excited about, because it is a new way for marketing to engage and provide value in the go-to-market together with our sellers.
Those are some incredible applications for some of that. I heard a couple of things specifically that you A/B tested, which is really cool to see what worked. And that early warning sites, it sounds like something that you could even dabble in, didn't have some of those next best actions. It would take certainly some work, but if you have the resources, you could match those two up somehow to make an impact, which is fantastic. So my next question is for Nandini, and I'm sure coming from Google, you have kinds of data that you help clients wade through. So, how are you seeing data being made useful? How are you seeing it getting applied to build those insights?
Yeah, I'll address this in the space of what we've seen in the last 12 months or so. So with the onset of the pandemic, in the first 3 months, just in that itself, we all have seen adaptation to e-commerce really just like hockey stick type rise, right? I think e-commerce in the first 3 months of the pandemic just saw an increase more than it did for the last 10 years. And so with that, we try to understand like how much of this is going to stick as we recover. And recovery over the last been a little bit like a dimmer switch, right? It's come, gone, come, mobility has increased, decreased, and so on. One piece that we've seen really, and we've never seen this play out as much as we have over the last year, is local. Everything has been local. So as we look at retail and restaurants, patterns of opening and closure have been locally based. Counties have pretty much been making decisions locally. And we figured out recovery is going to be local. If you look at local searches within Google, that's at an uptick of like 80 to 100%. And that already is one of our highest queries within Google. What's near me? What's local? What's going to define my closing hours, opening hours, my advertising decisions, etc. And you're all going to hear my son as well. It's just parcel of this conversation. And so I'll give you an example of what Google analysts did in real time to convert that data into an insight, if you will. They took a lot of this local query volume data to see how consumer interest changing as businesses evolve and adapt to the situation. Coupled it with publicly available county level information and any advertiser purchase data. Now you're able to tell advertisers what categories you should invest in, how that should change, mobility changes and evolves, what times of the day you should market certain products to, so on and so forth. So what your DTC and e-commerce efforts, which I started this answer with, we've seen the biggest uptick in where that should focus versus not, because some advertisers and companies are literally evolving in real time to figure out what their e-commerce pushes, especially when they've been a heavily offline business for so long. So that's an evolution we've seen using our data, but just also complementing and supplementing it with data that exists available publicly and that advertisers have as well.
That's fantastic. It sounds like there's a lot of nuances there that can really help optimize some spend, especially if you're entering the market that initially was not digital, which is great. And I think some of us are probably in that boat where we're shifting more into that digital realm and thinking, okay, well, how do I make this better? How do I spend less or the same money and getting more out of it? So those are great tips. Peter, you had mentioned earlier on, and you kind of work at the go-to resource for CRMs, or what did you say, the systems of record. So how have you seen people using data or seeing clients most commonly use data to turn those systems of record into something that you can use for action and prediction?
Yeah, I think just really important to understand the rehabilitation of CRM that we spent our first 10 years doing, from being the thing where you log in on Friday afternoon to record your call sheet so you can get paid, to being the thing where you log in on Monday morning to get your insight into where you spend your only truly scarce resource, which is your time during the coming week, and to turn it from a management system of record into a performance improvement tool that arrives at adoption. There's an expression called Goodhart's Law, which is that there's no number that can't be turned a useful measure into a meaningless target. And that if I measure the utility of a system by how many hours a week people spend using it, I'm at risk of confusing frustration with adoption. When people are asked after the fact, has your analytics system returned good results? They point to the number of hours a week that people are using it. And when you go back and talk to the grassroots, they say, well, I'm in the system for 4 hours a day because that's how long it takes me to do the data re-entry from all the other systems that are supposed to be feeding the beast. And they don't regard that as value creating time. So be very careful to measure value created and not activity or hours consumed if you're looking at that kind of thing. Another expression in the data world is the streetlight effect, the old story about walking down the street at night and seeing someone on their hands and knees looking for something. You say, can I help you? And you say, well, I dropped my keys. And you help them look and don't find them. And say, are you sure they're here? And say, well, no, I dropped them in the puddle up the road. Why are we looking here? Well, the light is so much better here. There are so many today cheaply available sources of timely, accurate data that the desire to find the answer you want in the data that's convenient to get is a powerful one. And yet sometimes information you really want is in a muddy puddle. It's talking to the person who didn't become your customer about why they did not, instead of talking to the customers you have and thinking you're doing market research because you double down on all the things that they like. And the person who almost but didn't quite become your customer is much harder to talk to. It takes a lot more cost and effort to find those people and find out what kept them from coming in the door. But the problem is that the street light shines brightly on the customers you have, and thinking that you're doing a great job because you're analyzing what they like and doing more of that is really leaving enormous value out of sight, out of mind. So for our customers, the most important things we've done in the last just 4 years have been to provide enormous increase in access to data about the people who should be your customer and are not, bringing in tools like MuleSoft and Datorama to take 20 or 30, and I mean that quite literally, 20 or 30 different little breadcrumbs and exhaust trails that someone may be leaving out there, and fuse those into a single representation of someone and say, oh my gosh, this is the only reason they haven't become our customer yet. And these are even as simple as metrics of looking at the abandoned shopping cart in the e-commerce and reaching out to someone and say, is there a reason why you weren't able to complete the transaction? It's not fun. You find out a lot of things that you don't want to hear about yourself, about how opaque or confusing or unfriendly your site may have been. And so it's not the kind of data that's fun to consume, and it doesn't produce pretty graphs. It's ripping off the scabs and making yourself angry all over again every day at the things that you're failing to do. Most organizations aren't very good at that. This is much more a cultural and leadership accomplishment in most cases than it is a technology adoption challenge.
I think that's super interesting that some of the data that can be the most valuable is not something you may actually find in your CRM system. So I think that's the power of the audience segmentation.
Yeah. See, CRM is very good at telling you what you did that got you to where you are. But what we have done in the last few years is invest, at this point, literally about $25 billion in acquisitions specifically designed to collect data from outside your silos and to bring insight into things that did not happen, as opposed to merely documenting the heck out of those that did, because that's really where most of the undiscovered and unrealized value is to be found.
I love it. So speaking of data sources that are outside you might own, I'm going to send this one back over to Nandini. Can you talk a little bit about what you feel are the must-use tools, views, reports in Google Analytics or the Google Suite?
Yeah. And I did see a question also in the group, so I can address that a little later as well. But in the Google Suite, in the spirit of local, I will say Google Trends data is just significantly, underutilized sometimes, but just is a great starting point to kick things off with. Google Analytics is something, and Adobe Analytics and, the suite of web analytics tools is something I would just generally recommend people investing in Google Analytics itself. Reports and things that you should look at is, because it's a website analytics tool, is leverage a lot of where your customers are interacting with your site. A lot of people sometimes over-index on things like your homepage, which I totally understand are important, but it's important to understand where consumers are interacting. More often than not, we find that's not the homepage. So those are the kind of reports I look at. Also, traffic source reports, which are the channels that are going to push people into your site and from beyond site into completion. So in Google Analytics, those are the views and tools I look at. I would consider looking at. These tools and suites of solutions are aggregating more and more so that they provide one view of your consumer through the different touch points that they have, especially as the touch points have evolved in the last year. We've got more mobile, more apps. So that aggregated view of the consumer is also important as you look at reports across the board.
And I think we have time, Nandini, if you wanted to touch on the question in the chat, which was, how are you managing those local insights for nationwide sites?
So, the thing with local, if it is difficult to manage like 210 different DMAs at the same time. So, but what we found is the more things are different, the more they start clustering around to become the same in terms of patterns. So while locally things were evolving and changing at breakneck speed, we found patterns amongst them that clutter into 3 or 4 groups. And then that's the activation that you start doing across the 3 or 4 groups, because no advertiser will have the manpower or the resources to develop a single individual strategy for every single local county or DMA. I think that's not going to be possible. I think it's about more identifying the clusters and the groups where you can start activating those strategies. So when we did all of this, what we found is as things were locally starting to kick off, there were patterns emerging that enabled our advertisers and our companies to react in 1 or 2 or 3 key ways for their consumers. I hope that answers your question, but I'm happy to chat more.
And I think that we find a little more insight with that. I hear clustering and patterns, and that leads me towards, more sophisticated analysis methods. And I kind of want to direct this next question at Sven. How are you using or planning to use AI, ML, or be more clear, artificial intelligence, machine learning, or predictive analytics?
Right, that's a great question, and I would add, in addition to predictive analytics, what I said earlier about prescriptive analytics. So don't only talk about where things are going, but what are we going to do about it, right? So at Cisco, in Cisco marketing, we currently have probably at least 20 advanced models embedded in the business through flow and process. Some of those models are directly connected into our marketing automation stack. Others are putting output into the hands of sellers through what I said earlier, these next best actions. So to give you an example of what some of these models look like, for example, we have embedded content recommenders into Cisco.com and into Eloqua, right? So, which is what we use for marketing automation. So in essence, what we'll do is we will recommend the most popular content, we'll recommend trending content, and we'll do that based on the profile of the customer. So we will do personalization for healthcare customers. We'll make certain they know what other healthcare visitors are looking at, those sort of things. And by doing this, we are seeing a 300 to 400% uplift in conversion rates. So that's proving to be a big home run with our visitors. The second thing we started doing is something that many of our new customers, basically new lots that we are acquiring, only buy one product, and then we don't actually see them again for a long time. So we also started, we built a product recommender where in essence, we recommend next best product. If they bought WebEx, what should they be buying next? That sort of thing. Because we want to make certain that we are effective at cross-sell as well as upsell. So the third area we do quite a bit of work in is attribution. We want to make certain that we understand what content is performing, how paid media is performing, which channels, which publishers. So we have built out a set of different algorithms that allow us to get past last touch and into better doing fractional attribution to the different touches based on Markov chain models that use its removal effect. I mentioned earlier stuff like early warning, right? That is a fairly sophisticated algorithm, right? And the flip side of that is what we call potential opportunity, where we take a look at companies that we believe to be in market to buy what we sell. We look to see if they are surging through third-party intent data or on Cisco.com with our first-party content. And then we check in Salesforce to see if we already have an opportunity with that customer. And if the answer is no, we will surface that to our sellers and to our marketing automation stack so that we can actually go after those customers. So again, that's kind of the flip side of early warning, which is where we see first-party and third-party interest, yet no pipeline. So all sorts of models like these are relying, perhaps not so much on AI, but at least machine learning and predictive algorithms. Again, I think this is where the future lies, especially if you can get to fully automated, and next best actions. A lot of analytics has historically been very descriptive and diagnostic. And I think that people get really caught up in that. And you spend a tremendous amount of time potentially wasted with no actual action and impact at the end. So getting into predictive prescriptive with an automated activation layer or a set of next best action for the sellers, I think is pretty nice.
That was a wealth of fantastic information and ideas on ways that you can start to apply this. Speaking of some of that personalization profiling recommendations, I want to go back over to Peter to talk a little bit about privacy. What's on your radar for privacy? What are you mitigating? Are you keeping an eye on anything? Are you preparing for things? Can you talk a little bit about some of that?
Well, I think it's very important to frame privacy around what it is and what it is not. People talk about security, which really means that only authorized parties can see the data. They talk about privacy, which in my opinion means that I get to decide who's going to be authorized. But then there's also trust, which is I have confidence that the people to whom I grant that access will not abuse that access. And there's a reason why at Salesforce we created an Office of Ethical and Humane Use of Technology, which is actually part of our product organization, not part of the legal branch or whatever, but is in the room when we're talking about the development of product to assure that the appropriate knobs and buttons and guardrails are involved in product design from the beginning. And certainly the last year has been one in which many of our assumptions and beliefs about privacy have been dragged out into the spotlight of subjects like contact tracing in the context of the pandemic, and also the degree to which people are discovering that if you throw enough computational power at what you thought was safely anonymous data, it turns out there are a lot of ways to connect the dots. I may have completely anonymous data sets about the movement of a cell phone and other completely anonymous data about the presence of various places of business at various addresses. And yet if I can find out that a phone leaves my home every day and every 2 weeks that same phone goes to a cancer clinic, I can start to draw inferences that I'm not supposed to have under things like HIPAA. I'm not supposed to know things about someone's medical condition. And yet what you thought was completely anonymous data allows powerful inference to be made. So getting out in front of that, not waiting until you're dragged before the bright lights of a congressional hearing, but being affirmatively engaged in giving your customers confidence that the data they share is going to return value to them and is not going to be abused by those to whom you've given access to it, we see as not something to be done in a reactive way, but as something that should be treated as an opportunity for leadership in brand value and customer engagement, and that is the manner in which we're having these conversations with our customers. Finally, I will also add that the need to be working with experts in this field has never been as great as it is today. You've got enormously complicated and rapidly evolving bodies of law like GDPR in Europe, California Consumer Privacy Act in this country. The number of ways you can do it wrong is growing very rapidly. The damage to brands that can be done from being seen to have done it carelessly, which would be bad, invidiously, which would be much worse, is potentially devastating to a company. And so you should be working with your providers not merely to provide you with the ammunition, as it were, but also with the rules of engagement, so that when you do these things, you do them in a way that you would not be afraid to see on the front page of the New York Times tomorrow morning.
These are fantastic answers. I heard over and over again, be proactive, think about it from the start, and have transparency to inspire.
Well, someone said that we have these conversations with a marketing officer, which they'll have this two-sided reaction of, wow, I can't wait to use this stuff. And then a few seconds later thinking, but people are using this stuff on my parents. People are using this stuff on my kids and my relatives. And they're quite aware of the two-sided nature of this conversation. And we want to be on the right side of that conversation, which is it's about confidence that the data you share will generate value for you and will not lead to abuse that you're not intended to have. I sometimes take this rather fuzzy label of digital transformation, unpack it into an acronym, CAST, CAST, which is very easy to say. You need to be connected. That's just an engineering accomplishment. You need to be aware, which is a business behavior of creating value in response to that data. If you're going to be connected and aware at scale, you need to be smart. You need to be using the leverage of things like machine learning and predictive analytics. But the T is for trusted. If you are not connected, aware, smart, and trusted, any one of those four will make you irrelevant. But without the trust, all the technology you've invested will merely create a capability that no one wants to have used on them.
All great points. So I think the takeaway is definitely have these conversations. And I do want to have one question for you guys that I think is important to address as we start to round out the panel portion of this. But data inevitably brings up sometimes difficult conversations, things that we don't want to hear. As Peter affectionately said, rip the scab off. So how have you all tackled situations where data may point to answers that were unexpected or against the grain? And I want to go ahead and start with Sven this time, and then we'll go to Peter, and then we will round out with Nandini. So over to you, Sven.
Well, thank you. I think my short answer is head on, right? But one of the things I want to stress, though, is that you obviously need to validate that indeed what the data is telling you is accurate and an accurate representation of fact. And what I found is that the data taken out of context, even if it tells you something that you feel is important, I think it is very, very important to understand the context in which data is operating. So one example at Cisco is we do quite a bit of work on my team to do planning and segmentation and targeting as we enter new markets. And as an example, we were working on segmenting the small business market. And Dun & Bradstreet and others said that that market is made up of 180 million companies, which made over, executives extremely excited about that prospect. What we did was we did a sweet spot analysis, which pointed to the fact that Cisco's portfolio combined with the buying power of those companies would probably point to more like 500,000 companies that considered sweet spot for what we sell, right? So I think that it is important, and that was a bit of a shocker, I think. So I think that the benefit we bring, though, in what we call insights and analytics is that we can then actually help segment the whole market and showcase why it is based on data that we feel that is probably where we're going to have the most success. So I think don't bring too much emotion to it. After all, we're there to enable the best possible business decisions, right? But I do think it is important that we hit it head on and that we rip that scab off, as Peter said, and present it in a holistic way with the necessary context.
Fantastic. Peter, how would you recommend or suggest help in tackling situations where data points to answers that maybe we don't always want to hear?
Well, Annie Flippo, when she was at the Department of Defense, said that if you're bringing data to a conversation and no one's getting mad, you're probably not doing your job. It is the job of data to tell us that which we didn't know, but telling us that which we didn't know is going to violate that which we wanted to believe to be true. The tool that I try to use is stolen from a quotation usually attributed to John Maynard Keynes. We're pretty sure Paul Samuelson first said it and claimed Keynes had said it, which is when the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do? And if you go into the room and present facts in a way that suggests that people have been doing it wrong, their goal in the conversation is to prove that they were the ones who were right. But if you go into the room and say, congratulations, you've been doing a brilliant job of dealing with the world as it's been. I'm here to share some information that might give us a base of predicting what the world is going to be so we can develop collaboratively a plan for how to deal with the world as it will be, rather than merely continuing to do what was good for the world as it used to be. Well, now you don't have a single enemy in the room. You congratulated them on how well they're dealing with what was, and now you're bringing them information on how to anticipate and deal with what is. At that point, everybody is on the same side. And I feel that's a pretty important tool for avoiding situations where people's main goal is to find a way to hack your data instead of finding ways to be informed by it.
I think that's great advice, framing it up for the future versus attacking what's been done. In
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, Will, I would love to hear from you, Nandini. How have you tackled situations where it doesn't always point to answers that we want?
Yeah, so I just want to double down on everything Sven and Peter said. Typically, when data, and there are so many cases in Google itself where we've seen products roll out and deprecate, Google Glasses, Google Groups. So typically, when data has pointed out, an answer that is not expected, the challenge has been the emotion attached to what we were assuming the response would be, and the hard pivot that needs to be done, assuming you do your repeated testing and you peel the onion and you see the same answer again and again. And so I would say that the quick way to react to it is to just have an open mind. And if this is the new order of business, then once you test repeatedly again and again and see that it's not a one-time stop and it's a repeated pattern, you get ready to act on it. I don't have a Google example, but I do have one that Google partnered with AARP on. AARP's target audience is relatively older. Pre-pandemic, it was a TV viewing audience largely. And as they started testing, just their presence and need to be on OLV, online video, the assumption going into it was that it would not be large, just given the existing demo group. And as the pandemic kicked off and we saw a significant shift in online viewing behavior, so that was a surprise for everyone involved in the test. And we did repeated A/B testing. The beauty of this, where we netted out, is just how open AARP was to pivoting. Once you see that repeated pattern, there is no attachment to your existing advertising agreements or where your money is going. Just an openness to start pivoting to new places where you can reach your consumers. So I think that's important to keep in mind as you start seeing some of these situations come to life.
Thank you. These were some incredible insights. And I don't know about the rest of you. I took like a page and a half of notes that I want to go back and think through, and I can't wait to watch the recording. So with that, I do wanted to let you guys throw your questions in there, but also thank you, panelists, for answering these fantastic questions, sharing your insights and your time. We are going to shift the session into small group discussions so that we can take what we're learning and hearing and talk amongst ourselves. How are we seeing this within each other's businesses, or where are we going? So the next portion of this will be to go back to the lounge, and there'll be small breakouts that you can attend. And we have experts lined up so that you can actually talk with others that are in your same area and actually have some people who might be able to answer your questions along the way. So we are going to take a 5-minute break. If you want to grab a bathroom break, refill your beverage, it's for some of you 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. I give you permission to grab a cocktail if you would like. But with that, I'm going to thank our panelists again, and I'm going to see you back here at exactly 3:55, where please take your seat at one of the breakout rooms. The numbers that are lower, so 1 through 8, will be more foundational topics, so more beginner level, like analytics, data, foundational elements. And then as you get higher up, 9 through 15, you will find people more prepared to speak about some of those more advanced things like integrations, machine learning topics that are a little more advanced. So choose your own adventure. And then for those of you who are sticking around also, there are some extra rooms for just open networking if that's how you would prefer to spend this time. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and break. And when you come back, grab a seat at one of the tables and we will continue discussion together in a small group. Thank you again, guys. We'll see you.
Thanks, everybody.